Hi, this is Russ Titleman, and you're listening to Fab4Free4All.
This week, Mitch Axelrod moderates as we continue with part 2 of the Apple record story, Strange Fruit. Right here on Fab4Free4All, we pick up where we left off last week at the end of part 1.
We're talking about the Beatles' Apple records, and we are referencing the really good DVD Strange Fruit, the Beatles' Apple records.
One thing about the title, though, about Strange Fruit,
I know where you're going.
there was a Billie Holiday song called Strange Fruit, which
her most famous.
It's one of her most famous songs. It has nothing to do with Apple. It has about certain things hanging from a tree, and that's being called Strange Fruit. It's about lynching. I'm not sure why they chose that title.
Well, because it is a familiar.
It's evocative.
But I would have picked You Never Give Me Your Money.
That's exactly where I would have gone
that's the title of a book.
Although it's interesting because that's another person who I think is unfortunately missing. While I do think that the talking heads used, the folks who are interviewed speak very, very well, but I thought it was a good selection of people. Chris Ingram, who wrote The Rough Guide to the Beatles, the editor of Mojo Magazine.
And
Tony
Stefan
Bramwell.
Granados, who wrote a book, an official biography of Apple. But
what I was going to say was I did think that Peter Doggett being absent was also was an absence. I thought that Doggett's book, You Never Give Me Your Money, I thought was very,
but as I said
very
at the top
well
of the show, I think they relied too heavily on those three people.
Well, that's why I'm thinking, just because to have added another voice
would have been nice.
But it's also interesting, my history of Apple Records, from all the books I've read, the two favorites is The Longest Cocktail Party by Richard DeLello, which, if you've never read it, is basically, Derek Taylor with a tumbler of scotch, basically.
Right.
But it's more than that, but that's if you had to put it in a one-sentence review. And then, of course, Apple to the Core, whose names I can't remember who wrote it, but that was basically the business side, the opposite of The Longest Cocktail Party, more the business.
That's more the Doggett,
Yeah.
the current way the Doggett book is presented.
So to me, I read those books several times growing up as a kid, especially The Longest Cocktail Party.
Well, it's funny you should say and I don't mean to be slanderous or libelous to Derek Taylor. I'm just stating what people have stated. In this documentary, some of the talking heads do mention that the boutique was on the bottom floor, then there was the press offices, and then there was on
The
top
Den of Iniquity.
Studio. But they also said that the press office, everybody was always drunk, and that was how Derek Taylor was the press officer.
But that's also a record company thing.
I'm not saying it was Derek Taylor was drunk. I mean, I'm just saying that they insinuate that it was of the time.
Derek more than implies it in a number of interviews himself.
50 years of Drift he talks about.
Exactly.
But it's funny because Derek Taylor is so perfect for this whole Apple.
Totally. Completely.
To push it out there, because the press loved him, and he loved the press because he was a guy from the press. But he also realized that it's just part of this game, this whole thing.
But I have to make a joke, where I have to say I think it's a rule that if you work for Apple Records, I think you actually sort of have some ability to Exactly. Yeah, you listen to Tony Bramwell, with all due respect to him, during the interview, but it was the only time where I had to turn the volume up while I was playing the documentary back, because Derek Taylor always used to have that sort of a mumbly quality in his voice. And Bramwell
as a press officer, wow.
Tony Bramwell, you read his book?
I haven't read Tony Bramwell's book. I mean, the thing about it is that
he has fun knocking some people in that book.
I mean, I have to say...
Well, he still wears the Still Pissed at Yoko shirts.
That's fun.
And he's 60, 70.
But I think the thing about having these people in the program...
Tony gives legitimacy.
He absolutely, without a doubt.
Tony was there from the beginning.
Yeah, but I think the cool thing is that it's almost as though the doc, I think, goes a good way, because it has the bit of credibility, as you say, in terms of having someone like Bramwell, and someone who's so respected now in the music industry, meaning the guy who's the editor of Mojo, that I think it does a nice job of being able to appeal to the hardcore Beatle geek, because it puts all of this information that we've had tumbling around in our heads for so many years into a phenomenal perspective. And it also attracts the newcomer out of curiosity, because it has younger talking heads. It has people who are kind of applying the fact that this was the first label to do this. It gives you what happened with Apple, because I don't know if the old timers would necessarily have put it into perspective as, man, you got to look at what a groundbreaking idea this really was in terms of how it affects now.
Think of the Apple Boutique. Now, the Beatles didn't make their own clothes. They sold other people's clothes. But think about a guy like Puff Daddy, who now has the Sean Jean line. And if you look at any rapper who comes up now, they say, well, I got my new song and I got my clothes line already. Yeah. Or they have their perfume line, if you're a female singer. That's something that didn't happen really before.
Well, the Beatles did that with the boutique and all that, but I think now people probably use Apple as the way not to do it.
Well, yes, financially, but some of the thought process in the beginning.
Oh, absolutely. We don't give the Beatles credit for that.
Every person, every musician, and sometimes that is used in quotes, has their clothes line, or they have their perfume line, or they have their something else line, hot sauce line or something. I don't know.
We should mention that we were talking about the Iveys and Badfinger. I do want to talk about Harrison signing Billy Preston. Very, very important. That comes a little bit later, but as far as Badfinger is concerned, if we run through their repertoire, they really weren't, even after Come and Get It was a hit, they still were not given the attention that they thought they deserved. And then turns out they had a couple of big hits, no matter what, was huge.
Right.
And then they really didn't get the attention they deserved until the end, where George took an interest and helped them on their last album.
I just don't know, though, and I don't understand that a little bit. I'm just being honest with you, because the thing about Badfinger is that left to their own device, they were the only act that could have been fine left on their own. Mal produced the second album, which really was the first cohesive album. When Magic Christian Music came out, it was a hodgepodge.
Well, it was part of the Iveys album.
Yeah, it was a little bit of everything and some new stuff. So you had the first album of the band, which was No Dice, produced by Mal. And yeah, we're going to do a full Badfinger show or two down the road. But, left on their own, Badfinger was okay. They didn't need their hands held because they had a couple of fantastic songwriters. They didn't need input from John or Paul or George or Ringo to be, And I remember when I was a kid, and we all do, no matter what, was huge here in America. I mean, my God, I remember that single being played constantly.
Here's the problem.
Why did they need to be so mollycoddled?
No, here's the problem.
I don't understand.
Well, maybe they weren't getting the studio time. Maybe they weren't getting.
That's true. You're right. It's behind the scenes stuff that
we
don't
never
know.
But also, don't forget, the Beatles put a lot of time and money. They were putting money everywhere. It was a money pit, which we'll discuss. But they were putting a lot of money into the Iveys in the beginning. And they thought maybe tomorrow was going to be a big hit. And they had them scheduled to go on tours. And you know what? It wasn't a hit in the UK. So maybe they lost interest.
But we also have to add in the fact, and we're leaving out the big, ugly, white elephant from New York out of the room. It's also the Badfinger stuff started hitting right when Allen Klein came on board. And when the money got pulled back, and the support got pulled back. I do see that aspect of Badfinger probably having been really just when Magic Christian hit. In a way, it's almost funny because what that really means is that No Dice, No Matter What, etc., took off despite Allen Klein.
Well, let's go there a little bit. It's a good segue because in 1969, although John is with Yoko, he does give an interview where he says, I'm a little concerned about the direction that Apple's going in. All right, it's a money pit. Everybody's, taking.
And if you think about it, it's only a year after they started it.
Well,
which no company makes money. You know what I mean?
That's right.
But they're not businessmen, so they don't understand that. So guess what? I mean, hey, look, let's call it what it is, man.
Growing pain, yeah.
It is growing pains.
Think about it. It's less than a year. Where they were in New York in May of '68. Here comes Allen Klein in March of '69.
Can I do the music? Dum, 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 dum. Sorry.
No, his left hand often did not know what his right hand was doing.
Who his right hand was doing.
That's right.
Here's the problem. The Beatles are the Beatles, and everything the Beatles touch goes gold.
Turns to gold.
And instantaneously. So if something is of their touching not going gold right away, they get concerned. And they're not businessmen. They don't understand it. And no one was around to say, guys, it'll happen. Just give it some time. You guys just have to
they had no one else there who...
The missing Brian Epstein.
The Brian Epstein, who they trusted.
You know what? It's the one thought that had been in my head earlier in the first half of the show that I forgot to say.
What?
The thing about Brian Epstein is, had Brian Epstein lived, think about that key element that you're missing from everything that went on with Apple. You're missing the fact that you had a guy who helped to arrange all of those tours for the bands that were in his farm.
And TV shows.
And TV appearances. So the thing you were
Everything.
missing with Brian Epstein was the Rolodex.
Right.
Was the phone call. Oh, hello. Yes, can we have them on Top of the Pops? Oh, grand. You know,
Yeah, right.
You had the guy who would have been calling up and having the
No one
Ivies.
did it.
I mean, the Ivies made TV appearances, etc.
Yeah.
But you're talking about Brian
The
would have
setup.
gotten them on Sullivan.
Again,
Brian would have gotten
yeah.
everybody on Sullivan. Bang, right away.
Instant, yes.
It would have been, oh, yes, Mr. Sullivan, we've got a company now.
And
they would have
Badfinger.
all been.
But the other side of the coin, when you talk about Brian Epstein, the Beatles had just re-signed to NEMS in, 67. Would Brian have gone over to Apple? Because NEMS was in its own problems with Stigwood. Stigwood was going to buy out NEMS except for the Beatles.
Well, I think that's exactly what would have happened.
And then
to Brian
died.
To be honest, I think he would have been poised.
Would he become the head of Apple instead of Neil
Yeah,
Aspen?
I mean,
he
where
would've.
where I'm going in my
but,
mind is
yeah.
that really what you would have done, and correct, I'm sure anyone who's an attorney, I will call Bruce Spicer and ask him, but I don't know whether or not this could have happened, but you would have given Robert Stigwood a sinking ship and let it die and just say, here, Robert, you want this? Knock yourself out, babe. Oh, by the way, I'm gone. Beatles are gone. Everybody's gone. We're off to Apple. See ya. Have fun with NEMS.
That's what I always, in the thinking of the whole thing, would Brian have moved over with
I think
ease?
so.
I think so
I think
too,
so
but
too.
I think there
But
would
who
have.
knows?
He probably would have been given a chunk of the company as part of his.
Yeah.
Maybe 25%, which is what he had with NEMS. With the Beatles, he owned 25% of their stuff. When he died and then they sold off NEMS, it was all these, if you think about all the money, because it's not just Apple that's happening right now. You got Northern Song's getting ready to sell off. Brian's dead for a year, so they have to sell NEMS and they avoid the taxes and everything. And then here comes Allen Klein.
Yeah.
And here comes Paul with his new father-in-law and brother-in-law, who, let's be honest, were probably more on top of things.
Absolutely.
Well, that's where I wanted to go with the Allen Klein. John says, hey, I'm upset with the way this is all going. Calls Derek Taylor. Derek Taylor gets in touch with Allen Klein. They get together, and now Allen Klein comes into the picture. All right? And we all know how Paul felt about Allen Klein. He didn't want to have anything to do with it.
Well,
He
at
had
the beginning, there was some trust. Well, not trust is the wrong word. Pulled himself away and said, well, let's see. Now,
Let's look at the subjective,
and
basically.
And the
Right.
Eastmans are saying, no, this guy is known for stealing things. And then Mick Jagger says something, don't trust him because look what we had to give up to.
Right.
Well, no, that happened
Later.
a little bit later. But he did say not to really trust him.
So now, keep in the back of your mind, Allen Klein's in the picture, all right? And he is a true businessman. Like him or not, he's a businessman. And I told Tony off mic earlier, I'm going to give him a little bit of credit here, and you guys can dispute it. But
I dispute that.
thank you. But let's wait to do that because that is really more at the end of Apple.
I wait to dispute that.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, but the one thing I want to say about this documentary, and we've been talking a lot about this Strange Fruit, the Beatles Apple records, and we're referencing it a lot because we saw it and it happens to be really good. But the one thing I don't understand about it is it uses a lot of footage. And don't get me wrong, people, this is not going to be your other DVDs where, they use stock Beatles sounding footage. They're using clips of the Beatles. They're using clips of the artist. They're using music, and you will hear it all. And each clip says courtesy of Apple, which I don't know if they actually got the rights or they're just doing that to cover themselves.
We don't know.
I don't know. But I will say one thing. The one thing I noticed, they use All You Need Is Love clip in here. The colorized version, which means they had to take it from the anthology.
Right.
Because the anthology was the only place that they did it on purpose to make it color. So that's a little odd. So if there are these rumors of a cease and desist, well, did they get it from Apple or did they just say courtesy Apple Records, EMI, whatever, Sony, because they wanted to try to avoid...
I think what they did, and it's all speculation as of right now because I'm waiting for the cease and desist to happen. I think they said
As of this recording, no, they have not gotten one.
I think they said let's do what we would do if we had the rights, and we'll put the courtesy as a fair use thing.
That's what I said last night to Mitch, too. I was saying
because there's certain fair use things you can get away with. usually it's not for sale in DVDs. It's usually for a news program,
historical
Like
reference.
if you see something on,
and this might be
a documentary on Channel 4 or NBC, whatever. You would see clips used, and then it's used differently. So that's what I'm thinking.
It's not for merchandise,
right?
But this DVD, while it is a merchandise, it is a historical reference thing. So if anybody is out there as a copyright attorney, we'd love to hear how they might be getting away with it. If they are, I mean, they might have legitimate.
And down the road, we might be able to do an amendment on this where we
find
to
out
the guys. Yeah, we'll
and
speak
we
directly
will,
once everything is.
But
you know,
the one thing I wanted to say,
and we're not trying to imply in any way that these guys did anything untoward, because they've done.
It's just
they've done a really good production, and
we know that
we are not
Apple's
trying
been
to
very
say
protective over the years of their name and everything else.
And you know what? Perhaps this is a really positive sign.
Or unless
it could be.
Unless they said, okay, well, it is true, and
There's
we're going to
nothing-
allow this stuff to be used.
There's nothing defaming anybody in this, slanderous or libelous in this DVD.
Which is also what I really enjoyed that. There was part of me that was scared that because there was nothing defamatory, that it was going to be a whitewash. I like the fact that they don't go into the whole lawsuit thing too heavily. They don't touch on it really that much. It's a separate animal. There's enough about that. This was just, you knew there were struggles, you knew there were problems. You get some good stories, and Joe Molland, I cannot believe in all these years, I never realized the symbolism of the cover of the album Ass.
Why don't you tell about it?
Joey Molland talks about the fact of when, toward the end of Badfinger's run, when Badfinger believed that they had to step away from Apple. They had done No Dice. They then went forward after that, having had the hit with No Matter What, having scored the biggest coup of Apple's publishing career by Harry Nilsson doing the cover of Peter Ham and Tom Evans' Without You,
which was
a worldwide massive hit song, which filled the coffers of Apple's publishing like nothing else. They went forward and then did an album called Straight Up. George came in to support them again and came in to take the reins and produced a bunch of songs. And then right in the middle of everything, events unfolded in Bangladesh. Ravi Shankar came to him with sadness in his eyes and told him that he wanted help before his country dies. And the next thing you know, George is out of the Badfinger scene and is putting together the Bangladesh
But to his
tribute.
credit, included them.
Included Badfinger, definitely. And then Todd Rundgren has to come in, pick up the pieces of the Straight Up sessions.
Just tweaked it.
And produces 6 or 7 tracks. You see the
tweaks the
asterisk
Georges,
on the album and tweak George's. So it was a collaborative production between the two.
And we can get into that at some other point.
Yeah. Then after that, again, they have this worldwide, this huge hit with Day After Day.
Which George is playing on.
George is playing on. And George is in the studio and Joe Molland tells all the stories. But again, after that, it's falling flat. There's stories of catastrophic tours that we're following and stuff like that. Well, along comes Warner Brothers and makes an offer to them after this. And all that was left was the one album they had been working on at the time. They don't explain the fact that the Warner Brothers album and the Apple album are almost simultaneous in their release. They were a couple of weeks apart, I think, the first Warner's record and the last Apple. But the last Apple album is called Ass. It features the absolutely, in my opinion, the beautiful song Apple of My Eye, which is I'm sorry, but it's
time to
go. And the cover is the god of of the record label dangling a carrot at this hapless donkey that's walking along with a pair of headphones on. And you don't realize that he said that, Joey Molland, the donkey's the band with the headphones on, walking toward the dangling giant carrot in the sky that was being held out by Warner Brothers. And it's very, very profound, and thankfully they don't go into it because it would have been such an emotional downer. But the idea that we lose Pete Ham only a year and a half later, takes his own life, mostly because of his horrific business experiences that he felt have essentially just conquered him. I mean, he's feeling so defeated, and he had his own mental issues, I'm sure, but takes his life because of all his life's work is just sunk into something, and he's not seeing any payback for it. And there's a very poignant bit at the end where he goes into the accountant's office and is talking to the accountant at Apple, and he breaks it down for Pete and says, look, not for
New
nothing.
Warner Brothers.
But, here's your big Warner Brothers deal, and they gave you $600,000, but let's have a look at that, Pete. And after they've already signed it,
Right.
and have already gone over to Warner Brothers, and he breaks it down to show that they're going to make about $60,000 each,
Yeah.
off of this deal. And Pete Ham apparently is like his face sunk, like he was devastated by this thought.
Because the Apple deal was better.
Because the Apple deal was better in essence. And how ironic and weird is that? After all, just Apple, oh my God, it beat up these poor artists. They just didn't have,
But they paid him better.
They paid him better. And, and Joe Mullen talks about his bitterness toward, he said it wasn't a bitterness toward Apple. It reflected our bitterness toward the industry.
Well, Joey Molland also says something very profound, too, with the whole Without You thing. And I think the other talking heads say it, too. Without You is such a great song. And they did a good version, too, Badfinger.
They did.
But they said, why didn't we get the hit that it had to take Harry Nilsson to get the hit? And he said, maybe we weren't that good. And he says it, But no, I'm not saying.
No, I know, no,
but he said it. He said maybe
I'm
we
sorry.
weren't that good.
As much as I love their performance, as much as I love Badfinger as a band, I think that that's just something that you, as a songwriter and as a musician, that you accept.
You say God bless.
Harry effing nailed it. That's the voice of God. When he
had his voice and he was.
But you know
there
what?
was nothing.
Later on in life, though, think about it. The coffers, unfortunately for Pete Ham and Tom Evans, get bigger because Mariah Carey has a
right.
huge
That's
hit with
it.
it, and they're
They've
gone.
already passed.
Both of them are gone.
Yep.
I mean, 83, I think, or 4 was when Tom Evans, 10 years later, took his own life the same way as Pete.
It would have been interesting, though, if Badfinger had left the way James Taylor had left it, with someone looking out for them the way Peter Ash looked out for James Taylor.
Yeah, imagine if Mal had said, you know what, I found them. I'm gonna just go over with
Mal
with
is
them
always
to-"
going to be with the Beatles.
Yeah, of course.
So if, let's say,
Of course.
someone else came along and said, hey, I think you guys are really good. Let's go to another label. And let's say Day After Day comes out on Warner's instead of Apple. The whole thing about Badfinger, you're right, is a whole show. But it's just something I've always thought about with them. Because I know you guys are into Badfinger much more than I am. But what I've picked up about them is these guys, every time they stepped on something good that happened to them, 2 things bad happened to them.
Well, yeah, it was like a seesaw. They got on the good part and then bring.
Yeah, there was a rake sitting there to smack him in the head.
Well, you know what, though? The one thing I will take the producers of the DVD to task on, in the bio at the end for Joey Molland, it's pretty funny. If you read the bio, in the extras, you get a bio of everybody. Mm-hmm. It's funny. It says, he continues to tour with the remaining members of Badfinger. And I'm thinking, he is the remaining member of Badfinger. Come on.
I'm kind of surprised. Why has he not? Seriously, I have to wonder at this point whether or not he's in contact with Ron Griffiths.
Well, Ron Griffiths did go on stage with them, I think in 2000 maybe. He went on stage with Joey.
With Joey.
And Mike at that point. Mike Gibbons,
passed.
who passed too.
Yeah.
But he is the only remaining...
Of natural causes, we should add.
Vincent Vigil has been an ardent collector of Beatles and Beatle-related photography since 1988 when he first purchased 2 Linda McCartney photographs. Join Mitch Axelrod for an exclusive interview with Vincent Vigil, the gentleman who created the I Saw the Photograph exhibit that can only be heard on our website at Fab4Free4All.com. That's FAB, the number 4, free, the number 4, all.com. You'll also find out information about how you can obtain your own copies of some of these great Beatle images. That's exclusively on the Fab4Free4All website.
We had mentioned the clips that they use. I did that for a reason. Because one of the clips they show is Let It Be. They actually show Let It Be clips, not only the rooftop, but in the studio. So I thought that was kind of odd.
Now, a good question would be the quality of it. Is
Perfect.
it anthology quality, or is it?
Yeah, it's anthology.
Or is it the Laserdisc from 1982?
It's anthology.
Either
That
they
would lead
pick-
me to believe that Apple would not let them use it because, again, I'm only
Unless
speculating.
it's just the Let It Be footage that was already used in the anthology.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Well, it is.
Because if you notice, there's no audio. It's just video. You don't hear the audio of the Let It Be footage.
You sure?
Yes. It's
But the reason I mentioned
voiced over.
I mentioned that for a reason, not just the legal aspect of it, but because a very important discovery is made when George walks out of the Let It Be sessions. He goes to the Royal Albert Hall and sees Ray Charles. And who's on keyboard and organ for Ray Charles? Billy Preston. And that was a really important signing. He signed Billy Preston to Apple. Mm-hmm. And that was important for so many other reasons, which I think Billy Preston deserves his own show, which I hope we'll get to. But that was a really big deal because Billy Preston, as we know, was the only person ever credited on a Beatle record. So, they really trusted this man. He was a great prodigy.
George brings him in because they're trying to record everything live. And Billy adds so much great music to it. And then they signed him, was it the first day they signed him to Apple? Because I think they realized they had to sign, if he was going to play with the Beatles, they had to sign him. And then they realized wasn't he signed to Capitol?
He was signed to
Capitol. So
Capitol,
Capitol, they just transferred his contract over.
Yeah.
So that was all George doing. And it was a great thing because George ends up producing Billy's 2 albums. To me, it's the prelim to All Things Must Pass, those 2 albums.
Now, correct me
Doris
if I'm
Troy,
wrong.
too.
Wasn't there a little bit of payback? And I may be completely wrong, but I thought there was a little bit of payback later. When George was looking for a home, I thought that Billy gave him encouraging words.
Thank you.
That George,
Second album name.
Yes, that George should come over and join him at A&M.
That might have been. Of course, he never actually joined A&M, so...
Well, he never did, but only because of lawsuits.
I mean, he did.
Yeah,
he
did. He had been courted by A&M.
He was, I think, signed.
Splinter was signed on.
Splinter
was Dark Horse and was distributed at A&M.
Right.
Yeah.
And then A&M kept saying, well, where's our
Where's
record?
our record? And
Yeah, noodle.
George said, I'm doing it on my own.
Well, no, actually, the thing is, the contract ends in 75, so A&M is bugging him, realizing that he's still technically signed to Capitol. And then it comes out in 76, so if they'd waited 2 months, they would have had
gotten their
33 and a third.
Which would have been good for them.
Right,
But
but
Billy Preston is a huge signing. And unfortunately, his 2 albums, they weren't flops in any sense.
That's
of
the
word,
way
but
God planned it. Was a big single.
A big single.
Yeah.
A really good single, too. I mean,
wonderful.
and he was a prodigy. I mean, he was just great. And they show great footage of Billy Preston.
God, that's
like
great
James
footage.
Brown. George said, you really need to be the singer, man. Forget about the keyboard player. You need to get out there and be a singer. And he, to me, is the highlight of Bangladesh. When he does live, That's the Way God Planned It. I mean, he
great.
really puts that place on its ear. It's
great.
It's really good.
And then if you want to go to the opposite end, he does Isn't It a Pity on the Concert for George.
Yeah.
And that was, to me, one of the highlights, too.
Yes.
That's wonderful.
But the one thing, and I don't want to really get off topic here, but for 1 minute I have to because they say it on the DVD, and it's such a great little moment. They show Badfinger from the Concert for Bangladesh, and, they say they let Billy Preston do That's the Way God Planned It. Imagine if they would have just let Badfinger, all of them were there.
No
Imagine
matter
if they
what.
do No Matter What.
Right.
Or Come and Get It. They were huge at that time. And that was maybe a big downfall. They would just use the acoustic. And Joey Mullen says, hey, we were honored to be there. We're not complaining. But someone else said, imagine if they would have just let them do 1 song or 2,
And
Come and Get
truthfully-
It, or No Matter What, and it would have blown people away.
Usually they were bigger than Billy Preston.
Much.
Yeah.
Look, I say Leon Russell, Bob Dylan.
But
That's
Billy
different.
Preston was George's prodigy.
But Billy Preston was George's prodigy. But George was in the middle of recording a friggin' album with Badfinger. Again, back to the idea, let's just drop everything and just say the Beatles as businessmen. Okay, I know, you're doing a charity show. Okay, I get it. Granted, they wouldn't have done Day After Day or something because it wasn't out yet.
But
It was
no
a new
matter
single.
what, they would've.
But no matter what, I mean, this is the band whose album you are in the middle of producing. Stick them on the show, get them in the movie, get them on the live album, and you're pushing your own.
Yeah, I hear you.
You
I want to
know.
get to 2 other artists because it's a long show and I don't want to bore people. And one artist we're not going to talk about because if you get the DVD, there's an extra on the DVD, an interview with Brute Force. And I think you know where we're going with this. The song was called The King of Pho, whatever you want to say.
Well, he was the pho.
Yeah, well, I know.
King.
I know. Yes, he was. But we're not really going to get into it. It was a very weird...
We don't talk about pho.
He has
King.
those great eyebrows.
Yes, thank you. But no, seriously, we don't want to get into that because you could watch the DVD extra of his interview and find out all about that lovely song, or listen to Come and Get It, the best of Apple Records. It's on there.
I like the summary in the movie where he says something to the effect of, the gentleman who wrote Rough Guide says, and amazingly, 40 years later,
Yeah,
it's still offensive.
Slightly offensive.
Slightly offensive.
Yeah, so go look up the King of Pho,
I used to
a
know
very
that song.
rare Apple single because it was never really released. It was 3,000 were
3,000
pressed,
copies,
and most of them given out to friends and DJs of the Beatles or DJs, friends, whatever.
But
and
imagine
it never
40 years
was.
later, and it's like just as offensive as it was then.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
so
it's really
good
funny
on
is,
ya.
It's given away to friends. Just like, oh,
Two-
well, we
two-
know what we're getting for Christmas this year, I guess, from
Oh,
George.
oh,
Oh, fuck.
For you. You know what, though? Here's the two artists I really want to mention because they talk about it pretty good here. I'm going to leave James Taylor for the end because I really think that he was the one artist that went on to really have big success after the Beatles, and he could have still been on Apple. Whether we think he would have been as big or not, we'll discuss for a second. Hang on there. Rob's going,
No.
But the one artist I want to give the due to, and we haven't even talked about Elephant's Memory. Gary Von Syak is in here.
Friend of
ours of the show. And John not discovered them. He found out about them.
And I will encourage
They were
folks,
big before John,
Yes.
quote, discovered them.
I will encourage people to track down the Metromedia album with the painted bodies on the cover. I will definitely encourage people to go track that.
Yeah,
record
because they
down.
were a good garage type band
They were
way
good.
before John supposedly discovered them.
That is a diverse and funky record, and I do agree with Gary's take that unfortunately I think John, when producing the album, I think applied a little too much of the Beatles mentality to that Apple record that came out of Elephant's Memory, and I do think that it put some restrictions on what Elephant's Memory really were about, at the time.
For the first time, and I've never heard Gary say this, he says that he didn't feel that Lennon and Ono were 100% behind the band. And that's the first time I've ever heard anybody say that.
Well, I think he says more along the line of that I would have preferred that we hadn't been on Apple.
Yeah, I mean, so that's kind of interesting.
But I think one of the things when you're on Apple is that you are overshadowed by the Beatles, and especially if a Beatle chooses to work with you. Look at Splinter's album, The Place I Know. Even though
Great album.
It's not part of this show, but it's all George.
But it's a good album.
It's a great album. It is. In 1974, he released Dark Horse and that was a much better album. So, I mean, I think anytime you work with a Beatle, it gets overshadowed. And for good reason, obviously, because a Beatle is playing with you, they must think you have some talent.
Well, speaking of that, the last two artists, we're going to leave James Taylor, but the other artist that is involved with Apple and also in the Allen Klein era of Apple. Allen Klein fires 26 people in a day, and the mood is just really crap at Apple now. And now no one knows whether they're going to have a job, and now he's trying to make it a business. All right, he really is. And for that, I'm going to give him a little bit of credit here. But Yoko Ono is signed to Apple and makes some damn good records. Okay, I know if you don't like Yoko, go listen to her Plastic Ono band, way ahead of its time, and
Approximately Infinite Universe, which I have to toss this out. That kind of freaked me a little. I don't know if that was a bad edit or what was going on, but I have to say I was very, very, very happy to hear the editor of Mojo really
give
her props.
Yes.
I do have to say when I was young, I didn't get those first two albums.
I didn't either.
Didn't
In
understand them.
retrospect, I do.
In retrospect, I do. But what gets me is neither Gary, who Elephant's Memory is the backing band on Approximately Infinite Universe. Gary doesn't mention it. And that album, Approximately Infinite Universe, is left out of the documentary. It doesn't appear anywhere in Strange Fruit.
They do.
No,
they do.
They show you Fly. They show Fly,
No,
and
I
then they
think they
talk
do
about the
show
fact
the
that
cover of the
Feeling the
album.
Space is the last Apple album. They don't even refer to that by name. They say Yoko had the last release on Apple.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
But
I
they
have to go back and watch. I
skip
think they do
over
show it.
Approximately Infinite
think
pretty
they show
much.
it.
Okay, but there's no mention of the fact that Elephant's
No.
Memory is the band.
No, I think that might have been for other reasons.
When we interviewed Gary with the Fab Forum, one of the things we talked about, he talked about the death of Samantha, and you were talking about that with him as part of the show. So he obviously enjoys the record.
It's
but
a very fine record. Very fine.
I'd like to know when that interview was done, because when they reissued all those Apple records a couple of years ago, what was the one missing?
That one.
The Elephant's Memory Band.
Yeah.
Was the one not reissued.
right.
There was a couple others, but that was the one I was looking forward to, because John plays on every track and co-produced it with Yoko. So
Right.
But
for whatever reason, it's not out there.
But Klein wanted to take back the money pit that was happening and try to reel it in a little. And John, who was disinterested up until he moved to New York and, quote, found Elephant's Memory and David Peel, said, I don't care what it takes. Yoko's going to make these records, and I don't care what it costs. So it goes against his own disinterest or interest in how it's going. And Allen Klein's trying to say, whoa, we're really
I know we don't have any money, but take
we don't
care
have any
of
money,
Mother.
but
But at the
take
same
care of
time,
Mother, right?
He and Yoko got along, so that was part of, I guess, too. If you're going to work with the four guys, you might as well make sure the wife of the guy likes you too.
I have to think that Allen Klein did not understand her musically, though. Allen Klein was a guy who was really into 50s records and dug the Beatles a lot, but I can't see Allen Klein, with all due respect to Yoko's music, I can't see Allen Klein
Which we like, by the way.
sitting around and going, yeah, I really groove to Yoko. I mean, I think it was a little ass-kissing, to be blunt. He probably liked her as a person, and yes, they did get along, but as far as getting it musically, I think Klein was just doing what he had to do.
And it is interesting, in the history of Apple, who are the two people to walk away with the rights to their records? Paul McCartney and Yoko Ono.
Right.
I don't know how Yoko got walked. I never understood that part. I know how Paul did it because I don't think he signed enough contracts or something.
Right.
But Yoko's stuff was released by Rykodisc later, and she's the only one out of all the Apple artists who walked away with their recording.
Truthfully, she might have been able to take advantage of the fact that at the time she may have gone back and said, you know what, I'm buying back my catalog.
Maybe she did. We just
They
don't know that.
might not have understood that at some point the significance of that
Right.
catalog was going to be realized, and then she was going to just be able to kind of give them $100 and walk away with all her master tapes. Who knows? But Badfinger still hasn't gotten, is still Apple product.
Yeah,
I mean, they
yeah.
haven't gotten away with getting out.
No, they didn't. They weren't able to buy back that
Right,
stuff.
right.
Before we end this show, and again, a very basic show on Apple, I think we've covered a lot of it, and the Strange Fruit DVD. But I want to just talk a little bit briefly about James Taylor, because James Taylor was signed to Apple, had his James Taylor album with Carolina in My Mind and Something in the Way She Moves, which George took the first line, for something. But a different kind of album, not an album that he should have made. They added a lot of strings. Paul was on bass. George was on backing vocals, I think, on Carolina in My Mind. And it's a different album because he went back and redid those two songs in particular.
But there was a reason why. He redid those two songs because Apple was in such a mess they couldn't figure out how to get those songs onto the Warner Brothers Greatest
Correct,
Hits.
but you know what? He redid them, and guess what? He made them better.
Well, that's true.
But
that's also an artist realizing that maybe my first album is my best album. Matter of fact, people probably know the version of Carolina in My Mind from Warner Brothers Greatest Hits than
Most definitely.
Oh, absolutely, because
Sure.
that Greatest Hits sold 22 million copies.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, though. With James Taylor, he did a BBC special. It was like one of those in-concert things.
Mm-hmm. Which is wonderful.
Yes, but he did it. He was still an Apple artist at that time.
Yes.
And he did those songs acoustically, almost like he recut them for Warner Brothers,
And
without
he-
all the strings and the big,
His very well recognized shows, The Troubadour, that whole series also. And
Wasn't
he was still on Apple.
Yeah, he was.
Yes.
So he was just about to be that artist that we, meaning the Beatles, could have had. But Allen Klein says, hey, if you want to stay on Apple, you have to now get less royalties. You have to pay for certain things. He was trying to make it a business, all right? Whether it's good or not, trying to make it a business. And he might have kept James Taylor. Whether he would have been a bigger artist like he is now, we don't know. That's speculation. But the one thing the Beatles did, in hindsight, I think it was a mistake. They said from the beginning, and this is at the end of Apple now, 3 years later, and they said, we are an artist-friendly label, and we are not like that at all. I think George even said it, and he said, no, we're not going to make these artists stay and pay and do this. And all. We're going to rip up their contracts and say, you go wherever you want. Well, that's the kind of company we are. Well, that's the non-business side of it. And I'm sorry, but I really think they failed because they could have kept a great artist like James Taylor.
James Taylor left 70 was his first
Yes.
solo album on Warner Brothers.
Sweet Baby James.
Sweet
He
Baby
was
James.
working on it in the studio
Right.
when he left the Beatles. So that could have been his album for Apple.
And Fire and Rain was actually recorded for that first album, but
Yes.
was never included in
Right.
any of the bonus tracks, unfortunately, when they redid the albums a couple of years ago.
Right.
But I think they let him go because Peter Asher was friends with the band and said,
Peter Asher's family.
family,
Maybe.
and basically said, I'm going to take him away. It's not working here. And I think they said, okay. And I think it was probably the best thing that ever happened to any artist on Apple that wasn't the Beatles or Yoko. So I think it worked out very well. Could the Beatles kept him? Maybe, but then you get that whole part from like 75 on when you couldn't find a Badfinger album or any of the other albums from Apple. There was a big gap, for 15 years.
I also tend to believe that everything happens for a reason. I think part of the whole idea of James Taylor leaving Apple also had to do with the idea that James is American, and whether or not you want to recognize in hindsight, you don't know how it happened, but the singer-songwriter movement was really just on the cusp of happening in a huge way.
Yep.
And it was going to happen in America. It wasn't really going to happen in England. Even Elton John had to break here.
That's right.
Yeah.
To really be anything of any great import, no pun intended. And I think that the idea being that I don't think James would have made it as big in any way, shape, or form in England.
Okay,
because I just don't think
don't
that
know.
they were that prepared for the singer-songwriter bubble to explode
Like
quite
we
the
had
way
here, like
it
with
did.
the Carly Simon.
With our
and
Carly Simon,
Joan
with
Baez.
Joni Mitchell.
Joni Mitchell, sorry.
With
Carole
with
King putting out
Crosby,
Tapestry.
Carole
King,
King
yeah, I
with
guess
Crosby,
you're
Stills,
right.
Nash, and then you even have to look at Cat Stevens. I mean, Cat
Yeah.
Stevens became a phenomenon because of America, really, and Europe. He was another singer-songwriter, and I don't think they were ready yet there, is what it was.
Yeah, I agree. And I think he was very fortunate to have Peter Asher be his sort of protector. And the fact that Peter is still working with him after all these years. So that's obviously they're very good friends. But by Peter taking him away, Peter coming in, seeing what's happening with Allen Klein and running, getting out, which was the smartest thing to do.
Yeah.
He basically saved James Taylor's career and maybe even his own career.
Maybe.
Because then he produces James and then he,
Linda
Linda Ronstadt and God knows so many other people.
Huge.
Yeah.
Just it became a really great record producer.
Toss out
Which
the-
more people know for him as a producer probably than the fact that he was in Peter and Gordon.
And very quickly, if I could toss out the thought that we talk so often about the business side of Apple and Allen Klein coming in to rescue the money pit that was falling apart.
Maybe put rescue in quotes. But
But the
it depends on whose side you're looking
right.
at.
But the humor of it all is that if you think about it, Apple was started as a tax shelter. And the funny thing is, what do you need to be careful of with a tax shelter? Sometimes if your tax shelter makes too much money, now it's not functioning really as a tax shelter very well. So the truth is, for all of John's, we're losing money faster than the British government, whatever it was. Okay, great. You can gripe. You bring in Klein. You bring in this. You bring in that. But the problem with having brought in Klein is that if you were going to make this a huge booming business where all we worried about was money, and you cut out the idea that, well, we're a bunch of creative artists running a record label, you've killed it as a tax shelter. Because you now
can't make too much money.
Because you're now going to just become nothing but a money generator. So while I totally agree with you on the hand, where that Klein was the business head that they didn't have, I agree that the idea that one of the reasons why Lee Eastman might have been a much better decision was because Lee Eastman could have just said, you know what, you boys still want to play with this as your little creative thing. You want to let the artists do their thing. You want to let everybody. Why don't we help you so that you're not going to lose money? But you know what? If you guys
You're not
don't
gonna
make a
make too much.
gazillion dollars,
That's fine.
so what? It's a tax shelter anyway. Let's just make it work and balance the books. So I got to go there
That's
with
fine.
Apple.
Of course, the overhang of the whole thing with Apple is that the Beatles are breaking up in the middle of it.
Yeah.
So they're taking sides, and if you look at the time period, it's a very short time period, from '68 to really middle of '69.
Yeah.
And so much happened in that time. John and Paul each get married to Yoko and Linda. Klein comes in. Eastman's trying to come in. Paul's trying to save Apple. So is John. George is producing a lot with Apple with these artists, which leads to All Things Must Pass, the type of producing he did with Billy Preston and Doris Troy. So there's a whole bunch of things going on, and then at the same time the Beatles are falling apart because there's no one in the middle anymore. There's no more Brian Epstein, and it's amazing when you combine the two things together that they didn't really go crazy from the whole time.
I'll leave it with this. The Beatles break up in the middle of this whole Apple. Can you imagine, and this is rhetorical, can you imagine the legacy that they could have left us, meaning the public, the fans, and the bands on Apple if it would have been a lot better managed and amicable amongst all four of them. Could you imagine if we would have had this catalog going even today? Right now, the only people on Apple are the Beatles.
Right.
So it could have been something special. We left out many, many artists. I'm sorry.
And
that's
that's a whole other show because,
Yes,
I mean,
which
we can base it on the best of Apple.
No, and we will get to
that's-
more. We left out artists like the Radhakrishna Temple, which were really important and had some really good records. Go listen
Yeah.
to Govinda and tell me you really don't find it catchy.
Yeah, and moving.
Yeah, and very moving. We left out Ronnie Spector, who actually did it on
Single.
Try Some, Buy Some on Apple. But Apple also had success re-releasing Phil Spector's Christmas album. Very well done and very, very well received and did well for them. So we left out a bunch of artists. I'm sorry, but it's time to go. So
But we'll catch that the next time.
yes, we will catch them the next time. If you'd like, you definitely should go out and get Strange Fruit while it is available. We hope it will be forever. It's the Beatles Apple Records. Go to www.seeofsound, that's S-E-E, of sound.com. Put in Strange Fruit in the search, and you'll find this DVD. I believe that's right now, that's the only place it's being sold, but it's definitely worth it. We had a contest back a couple of weeks ago where we were giving away a couple of copies, so we hope you won one. And if you want to get in touch with us and tell us what you think about any of what we just said or anything we've said in the past, you can reach us at our Facebook page for Fab4Free4All. You can reach us at our individual pages on Facebook. You can write to us at Fab4Free4All with the number 4 at AOL.com. You can reach us on our Fab4Free4All.com page. We have a blog. We love the comments you've been giving us, the positive and creative criticisms.
The creative negative. How's
Yes,
that?
the creative negative. Thank you. Constructive criticism. We take it all. Or you could hear Rob every week. How, Rob?
Every Friday, Beatles songs, 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. on 90.3 FM WHPC in Garden City, New York, and streaming at ncc.edu/WHPC.
Or you go to TuneIn.
Or tunein.com, that's right, and search for WHPC if you have it on your app.
Tony, how can we hear you?
Monday nights on 4F Freeform F4 Free in the New York area on 88.1 FM and streaming over WCWP.org.
Great. And if you're one of the 3 people who have not bought my book, egotistically speaking, go out and get it. I could use it because my kids are getting older and they need to go to college. So the $2 will help. It's Beatletoons, by the way, the real story behind the cartoon Beatles. So for Fab4Free4All, this has been your moderator. I have been your moderator, Mitch Axelrod, and I've been joined by
Rob Leonard.
and
Tony Chiguardo.
we will see you next time. Take care.
Fab4Free4All was edited and produced by Tony Chiguardo at Word of Mouth Studios in Westbury, New York. The opening and closing theme is Not Alone by Barry Waller. Be sure to visit our website at www.fab4free4all.com.